Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the 79th session of the online Optom Learning Series. Before we begin, a warm greetings for those who are celebrating Diwali. It's a festive season now in India and all the other parts of the world. I would like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a happy Deepavali or Diwali. Let me introduce to you our speaker for today. So today we have Dr. Damaris Raymodi. She finished her bachelor's at the St. John's University and then completed her Doctor of Optometry at the Sunny College of Optometry. She is now a clinical optometrist at the Metropolitan Hospital, which is the part of the NYC Health Hospital system, and her special interests are in ocular diseases and pediatrics. She also hosts on social media podcasts where she interviews optometry colleagues and she shares her own opinions about why she chose optometry, what is optometry to her. And I guess she has over 50 podcasts for you to listen to it. And you can follow her on Instagram, and her podcast channel name is the New York Eye Doc. So if I'm not mistaken, it is also available on Spotify as well as on the Apple platform for the podcast. And it's very encouraging. The recent one, which I had opportunity to listen to, where she interviewed an eye doc, which, she was setting up her own business and she shared her view. I interviewed her on what are the strategies and, what she came across on obstacles and what are the positives and all that. So it's quite encouraging, and majority of you being students here, I think you should definitely go and listen to her podcast. Very small, 35 to 40 minutes of your time, but the information which she and her guest share is really very enthusiastic and informative. And today she's going to talk to us about color vision. What are color vision deficiencies, and most importantly, how to address patients' expectations and questions in terms of color vision deficiency. So welcome, Doc, to our platform. I think your name is the New York Eye Doc. So I will say welcome the New York Eye Doc onto our platform. And let me just leave the screen time to you.
All right. Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Fakhruddin. And thank you, SK Optics, for having me today. And yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Damaris Raymodi. And on Instagram and TikTok, I'm New York Eye Doc. I'm at New York Eye Doc, and I love educating patients about eye health and about the importance of ocular health and vision. And one of the inspirations for both this presentation and for everything I do for my podcast and for my social media are my patients. Because I work in a really concentrated pediatric population, recently I had a lot of new 9-year-olds who were recently diagnosed by me with a color vision deficiency. And to me, I thought 9, that's a little older. What happened? What happened to kindergarten, first grade, second grade? But what happened to all these years? And so in an effort to, make a difference and to just get us all more aware, I wanted to present this today. So that was my inspiration for this presentation. I think like maybe three 9-year-old boys. All right, so today's objective is mainly for us. It's not going to go too much into the nitty-gritty science of color vision because, as you know, that can be so complex. And even the color vision of us standard folk, right? Like, we don't really know if we're all perceiving the exact same thing. But my goal with this lecture today is to empower our patients, right? Address some challenges of color vision deficiency that as optometrists we might have overlooked. It happens when you have big things like eye trauma, when you have things like diabetic retinopathy. This can kind of fall to the wayside in a way, and I want to kind of bring that back. And I also was hoping to discuss some advantages of color vision deficiency that we also might have overlooked and might not have thought of, as well as some aids and tools for CVD. I'm going to call it CVD for the rest of the presentation. And I'm going to give you my hot takes on all the newest glasses and filters that are out there for this. So let's start actually with a general poll or question for everyone. Do you know someone who has a color vision deficiency, or do you have one yourself? I don't know anyone personally. However, obviously my patients, but there is like a friend of a friend who I know has one.
If I were to answer this, yes, I do know somebody who has a color vision deficiency. A very close friend, happened to be a school friend, and school friend, he was diagnosed very later. So yeah, and probably he came to me for a second opinion, because when I was in optometry school, he came to me to check. Oh, I was diagnosed that I can't see some colors. Can you just have a double check? So yeah, that's the story also.
Yes, it's so interesting. And we keep hearing things and seeing it. And oftentimes for someone who's color vision deficient, it's hard for them to like explain or know, because our brain is so adaptable, right? And that's the wonderful thing about children. Even though they might have something that's a little different, they just like keep going and like keep finding ways and tools around it. But great. So yeah, 66% of you, and that absolutely, correlates to the findings. And if you wanted to engage like in your own head, since we're all like apart now, how many, like, what do you think the ratio is of men who are color vision deficient? I'll give you all a moment to think about it. And we're going to go to the next slide for the answer. And so, yeah, 1 in 12 men have a color vision deficiency, and it's 1 in 200 women. So around the world, 300 million people are diagnosed with CVD, and that's a lot of people. And that means that I'm clearly missing some people that I know in my daily life. Like who is it, right? Who could it be that maybe doesn't even know, right? And 300 million, to me, that number was interesting because that's basically the population of the entire US, of all 50 states. So once again, because we're optometrists, because we're budding optometrists, it is our job to like communicate, right, with our friends and family, like what we are concerned about, what things we find, and things that can, absolutely impact their lives here. So as you all know, there's many types of color vision deficiency. And so if you've noticed, I've been calling it color vision deficient in an effort to incorporate patient first language. And what that is a movement to make sure that a patient is recognized as a patient first. So instead of saying like, oh, like my 18-year-old diabetic, you say my 18-year-old female with diabetes, or an 18-year-old female with color vision deficiency. And that way we can, kind of think more about how this diagnosis really impacts a patient. So again, taking a look at all these color vision deficiencies, they actually, every single one of them comes in different flavors. They come in a mild, moderate, or severe. And they're all kind of hard, right? Like protanopia, protanomaly, right? But a good way to remember them is, this is how I think about it. So protan, deutan, tritan, protan 1, deutan 2, tritan 3, and protan would be R, right? So 1 R, D 2 G, 3 tritan B. So protan is a red weakness, deutan is a G green weakness, and tritan is blue. And with this, so then you have the separation of anomaly and anopia. Anomaly is when all of our cones in the retina are shifted to like different wavelengths. And anomaly is the more common type of these. Anopia is kind of just like how the suffix sounds, right? It's a complete absence of the cones. And out of all of these, deuteranomaly is the most common, and rod monochromatism is generally what the general population thinks of color blindness. They think that somebody sees in black and white, when that's actually exceptionally rare. There was one, so if you actually Google like artists with rod monochromatopsia, one artist from Spain came out that has it, and that, I thought that was interesting, but that's rare. So the most common here is deuteranomaly, or a green weakness. And going on here, this slide is just here for us to appreciate how complex the eye is. All of the layers, and within the layers, more layers, and within the cones, even more subtypes, which are the S cones, the M cone, and the L cone. So these are, right, the blue, green, red cones. And so with anything that ends in anopia, one of these is missing. And with anomaly, they're all shifted in different formats. And short cones, we all hear about blue light and blue wavelength. They're of a slight concern, more from obviously the sun, but they're shorter wavelengths, so they penetrate through all of the eye tissues a little faster. So that's just how I remember the name S cone, right? And L cone, red is longer. So now a general poll for everybody. We spoke about how deuteranomaly is the most common, but have you ever encountered someone with a tritan defect in clinic or anything like that?
Okay,
I
great.
have not.
Yeah, same goes here. I have also not
Yeah.
encountered as of the clinical practice goes, but some of the attendees have, which is quite interesting to note.
Oh,
Yeah, so about 12% of them have encountered a triton defect in their practice, whereas the majority, 88%, have not.
longer we're in practice, we'll run into it, or we might be missing it too. That's the other thing. So we might be missing it again. Probably, with clinic, there's always an emphasis on seeing more patients. And like I had mentioned earlier, what ends up happening with color vision is that, there's not a real treatment for it. And that's why oftentimes it's skipped. Sometimes with children, right, they can be like already a little scared to be, with you as a doctor in a room, right? And it's like a high intensity setting. And then we might be tempted to skip it as well. Or we saw that they came the year before, and then, we're like, oh, here, this child already came, right? And then before you know it, 4 years pass. So this is just a quick summary on all the different forms of color vision tests. We are all most familiar with Ishihara, which are I brought some show and tell things. So Ishihara is the book of the common circles with the numbers, right? And that's the one that was, that's a really good screener for things. And it can kind of separate between protan and deutan when you look at the gray colors, right? And I think of note with all these tests, it's really important that the patient gives a fast response, like within 2 seconds, because if they're looking at it for too long, then the answer is kind of invalid, which I thought was interesting. And then the next one, the HRR tests, Hardy-Rand Rittler, that's the one that tests for blue deficits, and that has more shapes and stuff. And then the lantern test, that's I usually associate that with more military or Air Force type of occupational testing, and it looks just like the name. It's like a big foghorn, and there's a lantern there, and there's like a randomized process of showing like a red light or a green light. And I've seen it done once. I've seen the lantern test done once for this, like, it must have been like a 30-year-old male patient who was applying to the Air Force, or getting reapplication process. But raise your hand internally at home if you've seen the lantern test done. And I think it's more commonly done in Australia and the US. And then the D-15 is a really cool test. It's part of the arrangement test because the others, right, they're more like identifying. But with D-15, you have 15 little caps. I always thought they looked like makeup, and you arrange them in a certain color order. And for your standard clinic, really, we all should have a D-15 because it's going to help you best classify between congenital and acquired deficits. And it's also going to be a great thing to kind of show, if you have a child, the parent especially, they're very curious about how they can help their child. So, you show them this, right? This is one thing, but then like having the child show the arrangement process is something that the parents can be aware of more so. And if you don't have a D-15, there is all you have to do. I'm going on my phone now. All you have to do is Google Farnsworth D-15, and then you get this. Here you go. You get this lovely disc arrangement test, and you can do it yourself at your leisure. All right. So I don't know if you guys can see that. Just Google Farnsworth D-15. But another tool that you can have if you don't have a book like this in clinic, the eye handbook is an amazing app that you can just use with your adults too. So all you have to do is go onto the App Store, right? An eye handbook, and you don't even have to sign up for an account. You can just press login without an account. And then, you show this to your patient. And I'll often show that. Oh, it just got washed out. There you go. I'll usually do this with my adults who I'm suspecting some optic nerve changes, right? So I'll just throw this up on my iPhone. And last but certainly not least is the Nagel Anamoloscope. And this is a more rare, kind of like the wild rare finding in terms of testing. And with the Nagel Anamoloscope, I saw it at SUNY Optometry. And this is really the best thing, what's really going to differentiate between red-green deficiencies. However, kind of large, it's a little ancient, and you're only going to find these at institutions. So, have you ever looked at one? Let me know if you have, if you've been able to test it. But I did in a second year of optometry school, and what it is, it's a telescope, and right there, you see it in the bottom there. It's a telescope, and it's a little circle, and you have to match 2 wavelengths of different yellows. And depending on how you match the color match, that can tell you if you have standard vision or if you are have a red-green deficiency. So from this, just a good thing to have is to download the Eye Handbook app on your phone, so you can have like a quick color vision test, and then you can always do Farnsworth D-15 on your computer too. Some people might argue that, with all this color testing, the way they were designed was to be sunlit, right? Or with a special type of lamp, right? But we're all using devices. We're all like on our computers, on our phones. So I think, showing it that way is still worthwhile. And next slide here. So here, this is an example of how our patients would see this. And, feel free to actually take a screenshot of this, because this is helpful, again, to show parents or to show loved ones of a patient on how they're experiencing things. It is a little washed out, but I'm kind of jokingly again calling it standard vision, right? What we have, because we don't really know our innate differences among each other. So standard vision, you'll see a 73 in there. Protanopia, which is what kind of weakness? Is the red weakness, and you're not going to see anything. And then deuteranopia, which is the green weakness that you're again, not going to see much there. And as I was mentioning, I am a huge proponent about putting our patients first. And that's certainly an exercise and something that can be hard to do, but it's so important to pause. So I want to take a moment to really read this quote through and read it out loud for all of you. And it's from the Journal of Clinical and Experimental Optometry. The discovery of a color vision deficiency is frequently a shock, and it can be accompanied by responses like grief, like anger and disbelief. And as frontline practitioners, it's up to us, and we are tasked with providing, advice, career advice, and just like, being that helping hand. And more so as optometrists, right? We're the ones who spend the most time with our patients. With the other professions, right? Like it has to be a faster interaction. But because we're doing refraction, right? We're educating the patient on their lens options. We're educating them about their retinal health. We can take that extra minute to really, sit down and listen to their concerns. And, for this, it's important to try to bridge that gap between just the clinical diagnosis and the actual practical problems that arise. Because I wasn't that familiar with the practical problems until I had, again, this batch of patients that came through, and then I had to think about it more in their perspective. So once again, I really want to hammer this home. It's so important to actively listen to our patients. Take a moment to pause, to be present. And one way to do that is by just asking your patients open-ended questions in a non-judgmental way, basically conveying curiosity. One way that could be applied to general optometry is, asking if they're taking their glaucoma medication. I'll tell the patient hey, when's the last time you took your glaucoma medication? And they'll let me know. And then I'll ask them, do you take it every single day, or do you miss it sometimes? And then by asking them that way, I get a whole different range of responses. So it's our job as doctors to be curious and to be a detective for our patients. And yet another quote, this is from the American Association for Physician Leadership, that with any complex medical diagnosis, people need a compassionate guide, sort of like a wise, comforting Sherpa who knows the mountain, the risks of various routes, the viable contingency plans. This physician Sherpa should be a partner on the journey, not simply a medical operative. And so by learning both the science and learning the practical applications, we can absolutely help our patients. So in the past, I think I would tell my patients, okay, you got to let your teacher know. I'll write the teacher a letter. Great. And, surprisingly enough to me, I'm so in-depth into optometry, and I just get fascinated by other professions. But teachers are well aware of this. They know to look out for students with this problem. And even though color, right, when a child is 6 or 7 years old, there's going to be a lot of color activities, right? A teacher who is, well-versed and well up to date with everything will recognize this. And oftentimes it's the teacher who will bring it up to the parents, right? So as you can see in here, in these examples, circle the things in red, match up the colors, right? And if you notice these folders in the center, not only are they color coded, but they have labels. So teachers know to put labels on things and to not have things look so similar, not have a bunch of different reds, like raspberry and red next to each other, right? So, but again, I will be going through a list of real world difficulties, and this is not something that we want to run through our patients either, though, right? We don't want to sit with them and tell them, these are the 20 things that you're going to have difficulties with. But instead, again, it's for us to be aware of and to sit in the shoes of our patient. And that once again, we may all perceive color very differently from one another. So it's more important to be aware of this. And something that surprised me as another very real world challenge is identifying the ripeness of fruit. So here on the left-hand side, the left-hand side is the red-green weakness, right? And you see all those pineapples, they all look alike. You can't really tell which one's ripe. And a lot of times, color vision folk with bananas, since that's such a common fruit, they'll often eat the wrong one. And what a lot of them do is they depend on who they live with or just like a friend. In terms of children, their siblings, I notice, really help each other out. Like they show them the colors and they tell them like, oh, this is the one you want to get. So ripeness of fruit is something that everyone up until adult age of color vision deficiency, they have to struggle with it. And another surprising thing for me is uncooked meat. You know, I recently started cooking ever since the pandemic started. It's not something I really did. So I personally, yes, struggled a little bit with knowing when it was done, but I don't think I can even begin to imagine how it would be for someone with CVD. I mean, look at these. They look completely alike. Usually we look at color. We look at the color of the meat to see how it's made, right? Like the chicken or anything like that too. But in the real world with patients with this, they often have to just get a thermometer. And I actually bought a thermometer too, but it's a different thermometer and I couldn't read it. But that's what a lot of color vision deficient cooks use. They use a thermometer to measure that out. And another real world difficulty that often comes up is video games. Warzone, Fortnite, PUBG, they all have options for CVD patients. They all have that mode because, you know, you're hunting, you're searching, you're trying to see any small movements, and people are marked up, right? Like your teammates with like a little red or green on top, right, of their head in the video game. So video game developers have been very aware of this problem, also, especially because their demographic is often, you know, males. So they're doing that. Among Us, which is a recent popular game, I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but they have come under fire for not having a colorblind option. And somebody on Reddit was wanted to demonstrate to everyone how people with color vision deficiency see this game. And as you can tell, like a lot of these, you know, and especially due to anomaly, they just like they look alike. They don't seem that different. So to be able to see who's your teammate and who isn't is quite a challenge, and it can definitely take the fun away from these, you know, these distractions that we have. But Among Us has incorporated now a new like shape signaling thing, and you can type out who you are. That way it's not only dependent on color. All right. And some more difficulties that are also, I found very fascinating, are that patients with CVD have a difficult time with applying sunscreen. They're not sure if they applied it completely. You know, identifying between ketchup and chocolate sauce is also that both of them look the same. And if someone is watching TV, watching for the weather, right, the whole screen of that is it's different gradients of green, right? Different gradients of red. It could all look the same. It could all absolutely look the same. And the other difficulties too would include things like telecommunication jobs, right? Or identifying electrical cables because they come in shades of white, yellow, and red. That is often washed out and looks the same. And this also has us thinking about our colleagues who are doctors, who, you know, maybe dermatologists. They might have difficulties identifying the redness in the skin, like if someone is sunburnt, or if somebody has a certain rash or psoriasis, that sort of thing. So they have to depend on other signs. And I was also reading in the Journal of Clinical Optometry how optometrists with color vision deficiency would have a hard time noticing injection of the conjunctiva and how that can impact a diagnosis in a way. And I am not sure though how they're able to get around that. I'm sure it's difficult to, you know, mention that, but I think if we're all more aware of this, it could be a way for us to offer a helping hand, especially to another student, and like identifying maybe the engorged vessels more so. And this got me thinking that if doctors have some difficulties with identifying redness, and even when you see a patient, right, like seeing their face, identifying whether they're healthy or whether they look, feverish or jaundice, and the relation to weather maps, perhaps with weather maps, right, since that's like a topography sort of thing, maybe corneal topography could be difficult to quickly assess for an optometrist with color vision deficiency. But if you just look at the numbers and take your time with that, then that is something to overcome as well. But enough about all these super interesting real world difficulties. If you know of any others that you've encountered, your friends or family that they've mentioned, obviously like matching socks, right, or shirts, do mention it in the chat. I'd love to read and hear more about real world things that happen to our patients. But let's go on to happier things. Let's go on to the advantages of color vision deficiency. There are lots of advantages, and most animals are colorblind. And it's not that they see black and white, but they don't have all the S, M, and L cones that we do. And instead, what are animals good at? They're so good at camouflage. They're great at finding these camouflage insects. They are able to see through pattern, through borders, textures. Maybe having standard vision like I have might be a disadvantage if you think about it that way. Recently, monkeys were found that they can find camouflage insects much better. And what color can do is that it can impede our ability to see colors, to see textures and borders. And so once you kind of take that out, you can really cut right through the noise, right through the hues, and notice camouflaged objects, which is also in people. It's super effective in hunting. And interestingly enough, it's also been really effective with snipers too. So that's why a lot of these occupational, in certain countries, the occupational tests for color vision, they don't necessarily bar out someone from certain things because they can show, exceptional abilities. And, back to thinking about the limitations. Oftentimes, people find out for the very first time that they're colorblind. And they find out because they're in the process of applying for a job. And like I mentioned, they'll go through the testing and then they'll see that they can't do it. And that can lead to grief, that can lead to disbelief, and it can lead to some anxiousness because, essentially you were never told this, you were never guided through it. For a lot of these career choices, like becoming a pilot or an air traffic controller, right? You've dedicated a lot of time to studying for this, which is why I think it's super important for all of us to, with children, at least biannually, if not annually, rescreen their color vision, see how they're doing with it. And maybe a child might be shy the first time and you weren't able to get the color vision test. But if you bring them back in 3 to 6 months and they see you again, they see the same exam room, they'll be encouraged to trace the number out and give you answers. And that way, for sure that, oh, they're not color vision deficient, or they are. And so the career choices, right, that would be limited would be a lot of the military, Air Force, and Navy positions, and some electricians, certainly, as we mentioned with the real world challenges, right? And the other thing too is that, there you go, your occupations are also just limited to your imagination. You can actually be a number of things. You can be a doctor, you can be a lawyer, you can be a writer, you can even be an artist, and you can even work with makeup. Through my digging of forums and trying to find real world applications, for one of the big makeup companies. This gentleman, he was in charge of the red lipsticks and differentiating them. So even though he was, had a color vision deficiency, he may not have been able to pick out a red lipstick from like a green one. However, among the reds, he was able to see the subtle differences that his colleagues with standard vision could not. And isn't that fascinating that you could still work in makeup? So what I often tell my patients is, like, yes, we have found this. We have found that your child is color vision deficient. We need to communicate this to their teachers. And some way you can help too is by labeling, right? Like all their pencils, all their markers. And, it only limits, how I say it to patients is that it only limits really specialty military type of jobs. But there are many CVD patients who are doctors, who are lawyers, and who just do just about everything. And another thing too of note is that I think businesses and industries in general, other than the video gaming industry, really they overlook the concerns of CVD people. Oftentimes, packaging, infographics, and ads, they're all designed without keeping them in mind and without realizing it. I'm including myself because I think my logo for New York Eye Doc might not be so color vision deficient friendly. Without realizing it, we are alienating about 5% of the entire population. So that's something that we should all look into. And that's also why I kept my whole presentation a little bit more minimal too, so that everybody could appreciate it. And, let's move on to the aids and tools for color vision deficiency. As you know, there is no treatment for this. And, it's going to be, there are some studies out there about some gene therapy, but that's a long ways away. And our patients with this, they're experiencing the problems right now. So there's a bunch of different things you can do. There's the Enchroma lens, which is the small red lens. It's a contact lens, and it's a specialty lens that you're really only going to get with an eye doctor and through a process. And, people really search for these options. They search for these aids and seek out help online. And more recently, in terms of virality on YouTube and TikTok, we have the Enchroma lens. Who here has heard of the Enchroma lens? It's touted as something that is going to help colorblind patients see all the colors. And raise your hand, guys. Have you seen the videos of the patients, crying after they can see their child's eye color for the first time? After seeing, being able to see the red flowers, right, within a green bush. It's pretty fascinating. Yes, yeah, raise your hand. We've all seen these videos. They're very moving. And it may make us think that the patient who's wearing those lenses is seeing color like we are. But what the Enchroma lens really is, it's a filter. And if you go on their website, you will see all the options. And I encourage you to go on their website because as optometrists, we are the front lines of eye care. And our friends and family, they're going to send these videos to us. I'm sure they already have to you. And they're going to tell us, wow, these glasses are for colorblind people. Like, this is incredible. And they're going to have questions for you first before they go to their doctor. So we have to get really educated on what's out there. So what it really is, it's a filter. And what it can do is it blocks out some wavelengths and it highlights other wavelengths. That's all it is. And for the Enchroma lens, online, you can get it for anywhere between $300, $400. And the Pilestone lens is of a similar filter. Same thing. It's not going to necessarily give a person vivid, bright vision, like I brought this here to show you. I'll show you this in a bit. These are just some markers, right? It's not going to show the person the colors in this format, but it will highlight the differences in the hues. And as a person wears it, they become more accustomed to the differences and they'll notice things pop out more, but it's certainly not a cure or not a treatment for it. And it depending, remember, I had mentioned that there was mild, moderate to severe forms of all the color vision deficiencies. They if your form is too strong, those glasses aren't really going to help. They're not going to help you much. But they do offer a money back guarantee, which is, nice of them. What it does is, I did want to mention this from the Journal of Optometry and Vision Science. There are studies now out that are, exploring the efficacy of the Enchroma filters. And a quote, it says here that while Enchroma filters may affect the nature of CVD, it's not necessarily going to alleviate its severity. And yes, performance was increased in the different tasks in Ishihara and HRR, but it was only a mild improvement, and it didn't necessarily have them say enough plates correctly. So the study by the Journal of Optometry and Vision Science says that it doesn't support the efficacy of Enchroma filters, and it doesn't believe that it corrects color discrimination in colorblind individuals. But it certainly could be a beautiful thing to see, your child's blue eyes and to see their difference for the first time. I mean, it's definitely something that's there. And if you can't get your hands on a Enchroma, glasses, or you're not really sure it's going to work for you, there's an app for that. All you have to do on your app store is type the Colorblind Pal app. And let's see if I can show you a little bit of it. But here you go. So all it does is, see if you could see that right there. It's a camera, and on the bottom, it has a little square, a little plus sign. And if a color vision deficient patient aims it to something, it'll identify that's red, that's green, that's and it'll give you like exact names. Like right now it's telling me faint green, very dull green, cyan. So it gives me all of the differences there. And it's also a great thing to have to show your patients the differences in terms of color blindness. So here you have let me turn on the option. And feel free to take a moment right now to check on your app store for the colorblind app. Because, all right, here you go. So you can simulate protanopia. That's what I would look like to someone who has protanopia. And these are what can you see that, guys? Let me know in the chat if you could see it. And again, this is a great thing to show parents, teachers too. And then let me show you deuteranopia. This is what I look like, right? My blue wristband, and then that's how it looks like with deuteranopia. And then these are the markers, and this is what it'll look like. And so it doesn't just simulate that, it actually has a corrector. So it'll have a filter that corrects for deuteranopia and that corrects for protanopia. And that way, your patient can enjoy sort of the Enchroma lens concept. So for us, it might be difficult to see, but here's the filter that corrects red deficiency. So this is how we would see it. And then can you see that? It kind of highlights the differences more. So this is an incredible tool to have, and a great tool to make our patients aware of the Colorblind app. There's also a Fruitone app concept. It's not an app yet, but it's a project on Behance, and I clicked out of it, but I'll just pull it up on here. What the goal with that is to help patients, out when they're out at the grocery store, when they're out at the market, to help them identify what is ripe and what isn't. And it looks like that. It's still a concept. They want to develop an app. I'm not sure where that's going, but it's something to kind of keep tabs on. The Fruitone app, which is hopefully both a little book and an app that'll help a patient choose a ripe banana. right? And to help that not be so much of an issue. And I think so both of the apps that I mentioned today too were the Eye Handbook app. That way you can have your own Ishihara plates everywhere you go. And why not test all your family members? Let's try to find everyone who's been, lurking in the dark, so to speak. So Eye Handbook app and the Colorblind Pal app. All right. Let me know in the chat if you got a chance to download it. All right. So these tools, they're out there. They're great. And it's great to make patients aware of them too, because again, parents are absolutely amazing. Personally, during this time in the pandemic and with my patients, parents really went above and beyond for their children, and that made me have just so much hope in terms of communicating with parents, because sometimes, right, like you might feel that they aren't, maybe they're not completely connected with what you're saying. But when a diagnosis happens, when there's a tragedy of sorts or that sort of thing, parents educate them and tell them about it, then they'll go in it informed, right? And since CVD is so common, like I was saying, we really need to try to test every one of our friends and family, make sure we're not missing anyone. But there's actually a lot of celebrities and notable folks who have CVD. One, all the way to your right, is Mr. Rogers with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And of course he had CVD. He was such a kind, if you aren't familiar with him, he was an American TV presenter in the late 80s and early 90s, and he had a children's show. I'm sure it was worldwide, actually, but he was always so cognizant of all the children, and he even had a blind child write in and say, "Oh, hey, can you say when you're feeding the fish in your tank, because I can't see that you're feeding them, but I'm worried about the fish in your tank if they're getting fed or not." So he often shook the little fish flakes, and he started then saying, I'm putting fish flakes in the aquarium. And he's actually the reason that there is educational TV programming. When he first started his show, he went to the United States Congress and mentioned the importance of education for children. And so it's an incredible person to share a CVD diagnosis with. And then the next, I was trying to find an actor, Eddie Redmayne, who was in Les Miserables and who played Stephen Hawking too. He has a color vision deficiency. And why do I have Crayola there? Well, Emerson Moser was Crayola's most senior crayon molder. He worked for the Crayola company for 37 years. And it's estimated that he molded about 1.4 billion crayons. And after he retired, he finally revealed that he was also a colorblind. And the Crayola, this whole thing reminds me of also the Sesame Street video on YouTube of making crayons. It's just one of these faint memories that you have of your childhood. And something interesting about patients with CVD is that they prefer the smaller crayon boxes with less options. They're not going to go for your large 64 or 100 option, that one that has a sharpener in the back, right? All right, so let's see. Do you guys should we do questions now? I think that's really it for me. This was super interesting. Those are my references. For part of my homework is to find someone a little closer to me who has CVD so that I can, understand them better. Him, I was going to say him because most likely it is, usually males get this, but, anybody, so that we can better help our patients. Please stay in touch. And do let me know if you were able to find someone in your own circle. You can find me on Instagram at New York Eye Doc. And send me a DM and let me know, hey, my cousin is a red-green colorblind, or my brother is, and we never knew, and now we found out. And like Fakhruddin said earlier too, you can search for my podcast. All you got to do is type New York Eye Doc. I'm Apple Podcasts, Spotify. I'm on Google Podcasts. I'm on Stitcher. I'm everywhere. Just all you got to do is Google me. All right. And let me know if you have any questions. Should we open up questions now? Or we can do, I guess, the multiple choice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doc. I think very informative and really something really interesting take-home messages, especially the apps. Very fascinated me in terms of the app which where we can show to our patients or the parents specifically on how are the kids seeing, so that it helps us to explain to them. Really informative. Thank you so much. And first of all, I think I forgot to mention that it's a very early morning for you. Thank you for doing this. It's a Saturday early morning, a weekend on a very early morning in the US, and very grateful to have with us and share the information.
No, thank you, thank you. It's been great. I had a good time.
Yeah, I did read a comment before. It said that the D15 test must be done monocularly. It should be done with one eye. I think most of the color vision test should be done monocularly, right? Any comments on the clinical aspects for it?
I agree, Dr. Elias. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, D15, since D15 is no longer a screener. The other ones are more like, okay, let's screen for this. But yes, D15 should be done monocularly.
That's right. Yeah.
More so, yes. But yeah, all of them more or
Right.
less should. With adults, definitely, we didn't get into that, but so many disease processes have impact on red-green identification, and that you want to do monocularly to make sure you're not missing out like red desaturation from optic nerve changes.
Great. Okay. And the other thing what I would just like to comment on the specifically what you told us about the fruit ripening thing, and the meat, whether it's cooked, undercooked, and all that. We never thought about how would our patients experience that, and that's a really important thing to understand. And you did mention all the time that your presentation is more patient centric rather than clinical based. And how are we going to understand patients? So that's really important for us to know as well.
Yes, so important. That way we can, not we don't necessarily want to be doom and gloom, but we kind of at least know in the back of our head, like, okay, these are the things they're going to experience. And then if the child mentions that they like a certain fruit or something like that, we'd have a follow-up to it.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay, great. So just the first question here, I'm just sharing the slide. uh, Any comments on this? It's a bit clinical based, but yeah, how would we know whether the patient has mild, moderate, or severe type? Because as you mentioned, the anomaly and the OPRs have classified as mild, moderate, and severe. Any comments on this?
The D15 is the most practical way to really identify mild, moderate, severe. And ordering a D15, that it's not that difficult to obtain one, right? But the best way to know mild, moderate, severe would be through the Nagel Anamoloscope, and there are other anomoloscopes around as well too, where you're mixing and matching specific wavelengths, and
That's
then you
right.
turn a knob. That would be like the best way. Mhm.
That's right. And the other question is about driving. So yeah, of course, when it comes to driving, what's your comment on this? Whether it would be dangerous for a person to drive if the person has or a driver has CVD? Any comments on?
Well, with drivers who have CBD, from my exploration, they actually don't have a hard time identifying it because the wavelengths of the brightness is different enough. And traffic controllers, at least for, your average driver, right? Like without a commercial license or anything like that, they have that in mind. They know that, like, okay, the top has to be right green, right? And all that. So that's not difficult. However, if you do search through PubMed, if you search through Google Scholar, a lot of accidents are associated with patients with CVD. So that, I mean, there's certainly that too, which is probably why with pilots, it's not so much of a, that's why they're barred more or less from the occupation. I know, I think Japan, in terms of a strictness of colorblind deficiency, like really like doesn't allow for you to participate in certain vocations. But it could be. I didn't read up on it because it was a too morbid of a topic at the moment, right? For me, with airplane accidents. But yeah, there's studies on that.
Yes, studies. Yeah. Uh,
Hmm.
some countries don't even give license as well. It's a part of their licensure testing when it comes to driving. So probably I think it's a no at this point of time. Even if we know that the top is gonna be the red and it's fixed for that particular area or that particular state,
Hmm.
but I think it's still a bit of a challenge for for the patients. Not only for them, actually, for us on the roads is kind of a challenge to have deficiency patients.
Yeah, for me, driving is difficult as is. So, so that's it's such a difficult concept for me. Like I have a license, but it's hats off to everybody who's a good driver. It's cool.
Okay, great. The next question is, what's your thoughts on smart contact lenses as a better future for treating CVD?
Well, I think that that's certainly an option. I don't know if it would be necessarily a contact lens that would treat it. I do think that you would be able to apply the special filters and really make them microscopic so that it can fit, right?
Yeah.
But I think maybe more it would have to be a retinal implant in the same way that they have one for retinitis pigmentosa, where a patient can kind of see like large shadows. I
Yes.
think if anything, that would be have to be the way to go because there's something different, inherently different with the cones themselves.
Mm. Yeah, it has to be something known as an implant. I think contact lenses will help to enhance, like as you discussed,
Right, right.
chrome lenses. They ideally help to enhance the color perception, and it's not really treating, but yeah, some implants kind of a thing. And we did have a session on this. If I may add on, we did have a session which talks about different kinds of implants for different ocular conditions, what Dr. Dama was mentioning about the retinitis pigmentosa. I think those who are interested about the implants and all that, you can go to our YouTube channel and watch that. It was by Dr. Arti, and she discussed about the different kinds of implants which are under research for different ocular conditions. Color vision is, yeah, I think still more years or decades to go when we have something for our patients. Right. And connecting question is, any comments on this? Does color vision deficiency start from birth? Is there any comments on this which you would like to make?
Well, interestingly enough, I think this still needs to be more studied because, babies, they don't have all their rods and cones completely developed, and it starts developing after a few weeks. So there's still some exploration being done that maybe something was a little different, right? That happened. Maybe they weren't exposed to something, but that's a question. However, I mean, in terms of males and inheritance, that seems to be pretty solid that it's through the most commonly autosomal recessive. But yeah, I was reading about how there may be more studies needed into seeing, you know, kind of in the same way how kittens, right? The study of where kittens were introduced to vertical and horizontal lines, maybe at some point in development in the first few weeks, they were not introduced to something.
Mm, that's right. Yeah.
So might not be.
Yeah. And I think as optometrists, if we were to play a role in detecting, I think you did mention that during the session that we can play a very important role in terms of detecting it. So we could get involved in preschool screenings where we not only screen for vision, we must also screen for color vision as well, and get to know if there's anything happening on that end as well, right?
Yeah, I remember that when I was in kindergarten, I was screened for color vision. I thought it was very cool. But, maybe someone mentioned if they know that they were someone in the comments or chat, if you were also tested for color vision, I'd like to know, like
Okay.
screened for it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And yeah, I think we have taken almost all questions on the chat. There's somebody who is having a very interesting, comment. Probably it's not a question because it's too early. Because of the pandemic, the screen time is increasing, and probably there would be color vision deficiency in that case. I mean, have you read about this? Or would you like to add on anything? Because of the increased screen time, would there be a possibility of acquired color deficiency?
No, I don't think so. Only because the amount of blue light that's really emitted from screens, it's not impacting much. It's not going to penetrate. The amount is very minimal, and it would be, yeah, with acquired color vision deficiency, it's a much more internal process, right? Because it would be a degeneration that's happening. It would mean that, right? Like cones have discs, rods have discs, and they are constantly metabolizing and replenishing themselves. And once they're not, that's an acquired color vision deficiency. So that would be some sort of optic nerve change, right? Something inflamed, something toxic to the optic nerve. So not necessarily, but there might be, in children, there might be a change in perception, right? With how, if a child is started off on like a screen on their iPhone from 6 months, unfortunately, we see that their world is their eyes are always converged, right? They're not really developing. They might have stereo acuity, but they might not have like the depth perception that is involved between like actual objects and manipulating objects. So, and then they'll also develop dry eye from the increased screen time, which can, tear film is a huge part of seeing clearly. So it might seem like the colors blur into each other, and that might mimic some color vision deficiency. But I don't think necessarily in that way. But we'll have to find out now when these children when they're 18, right? We'll see what happens.
That's right. And just a curious question: when you had this, pooling of patients which encourage you to do the presentation, any defects in their stereo acuity or something which you were able to pick up as well? Any correlation between color vision and stereo acuity, if you would have measured or looked at?
So there was not there wasn't a correlation. Any stereo acuity was directly because they had an amblyogenic refractive error. And I was looking at this too. There are studies where there is no correlation between color vision deficiency and amblyopia strabismus or anything like that. It's separate. But if they happen to have, right, like a large astigmatism, then yeah, their stereo acuity is going to be reduced.
Yeah, so color vision is not the causative factor of reduction in stereopsis. Probably there is some underlying pathology other than the color vision, probably refractive error, anisometropia, or strabismus, right? As you mentioned. That's great. Okay. So yeah, I think that's wraps up everything. Thank you very much, Doc, for doing this for us. I think very informative, and everybody, I think definitely we have something to take away from this, especially on the patient's perspective and understanding what our patients sees when they have color vision deficiencies, right? Thank you so much for doing this for us on a very early Saturday morning.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, just to remind everyone that we do have session tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a session same time. It's 6:30 evening Indian time, and 9 o'clock late evening Malaysian time. I would request if you all would like to attend the session, and I would see you all again tomorrow. Until then, take care, stay safe. See you tomorrow. Bye bye.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Have a good day, Doc.